There's Good evening, Riverwest, Milwaukee, and possibly the globe. Welcome to Compose Yourself with Julie Brandenburg. I am composing myself as we speak. This is a radio workshop for songwriters and composers, and we are broadcasting from the Riverwest Film and Video Headquarters on Center Street in the heart of beautiful downtown Riverwest. Each week I will have a panel of songwriters, composers, students, and listeners here to share songs and discuss the craft of songwriting and composing. Our panel in the studio today is Denise Burton. No, she's not here. I just noticed that, and she told me she wouldn't be because unfortunately she's not feeling well. I hope she gets better for Thanksgiving tomorrow. But she is a wonderful songwriter, and she goes by the name of Compose if you want to find her online. On our panel today is Jacob Mushin, the bass player for the Freddie Lee Band and for the JB4. And also Spencer is not going to be here today because he has to work. So hopefully he'll have a nice Thanksgiving too. But what I do have the fortune of having two fantastic guests in our studio today is Laura Rosenberg. And what's your stage name again?
Well, my stage name is Myrna Oy.
All right.
Which I do Yiddish cabaret.
All right. And then Andy Mushin, who is also the father of Jacob. So they are here from California, and I'm excited to have them in the studio.
What's your stage name for your Yiddish cabaret?
Yeah, what's your stage name?
Well, I think I thought of Myrna Oy.
Yes, you
yeah,
did.
Okay,
That's
so I can only do one at a time.
And you actually get credit for coming up with the name of this show, too.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Yes, I was going to mention that Andy is an experienced broadcaster, and I feel nervous because I'm inexperienced broadcaster.
Oh, please don't. Yeah, all right. Well, I'll give myself the plug then.
Yeah.
I am the host of Sounds Jewish, a weekly radio show on Mississippi Public Broadcasting Music Radio, because where else but the Deep South would you expect to hear Jewish music every Sunday afternoon?
You can podcast the show as well, right?
That's right, at mpbonline.org.
That's awesome. Well, let me read the disclaimer. This is my show, and anything, the views and comments made on this show are the views of myself and my guests, and not the views of necessarily of Riverwest Radio. They are the sole responsibility of myself, and Riverwest Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. It's going to be a very subversive program, and they are not responsible. So ordinarily we listen to quite a bit of music that we bring in from Milwaukee that's Milwaukee-based or area-based, sometimes as far-reaching as Madison and Minnesota. But music that's kind of from the area. And we're going to listen to just two things today, just as a follow-up to last week's show, which was kind of a warm-up to the string and chamber concert that I staged this weekend over at the Jazz Gallery Center for the Arts. So I'm going to play two recordings from that concert. And it was a really wonderful concert. Jacob made a cheese plate.
That's right. I'm not really classically apt, so it was my job to cut the cheese.
Which he did extremely well. He also was the the individual responsible for guarding the door so that people couldn't come in late. And so I gave him that job, which he did wonderfully well. So thank you very much for all of your help.
As well as the cheese plate?
As
You
well as
guarded
the
as well? Okay.
Oh yes, he guarded the cheese plate as well. So it went very nicely, and I'd like to thank all of my friends and listeners who attended. It was just really warm to have so many people in the room. So we're going to play two examples, and I did share the concert with my colleague Steve Peplin, who's a jazz guitarist and composer, but he has also written some classical music. So we collaborated in that he played guitar on my piece, and then I hired the string quartet that played his pieces. But that's not what I'm going to play for you today. What I'm going to play is a solo composition that he also performed on Saturday. And Jacob is going to pronounce the name of the piece because I do not know French.
Oh man, it doesn't have the whole name on it. It's getting cut off here.
Passage.
I seriously, I can't even tell you. I can't tell what that last word says.
Passage de Tenebres a la something. He couldn't pronounce it either. So at the concert, he said very honestly that he couldn't pronounce it, and I believe it's the dark passage or the passage into the dark. And it is a piece that is both improvised and composed. So he had sections of it planned, but it had a very improvisatory nature to it. So I'm interested in hearing what everyone thinks of this one. That was Passage to the Dark Chamber, I think is the English translation, by Steve Peplin, and that's a recording of a live performance that took place on Saturday. So what do you folks think?
Beautiful.
It kind of stayed the way. He had a different chord progression in the middle than he had at the beginning and the end. He kind of had an ABA form, but there was like a B part where the chords were neat because they were slipping in and out of tonality. I really liked the way he was like, he'd have a minor chord and then he would hold one of the tones to make it dissonant and superimpose that over the top of a major chord. And it just seemed really cool. The clunking, clinking sounds, he was using a chain, like a chain, like a links of chain to use against the strings to make some of those sound effects. So when you heard the clunk, that was a chain dropping, which was, I think, part of the whole sound, the sonic experience. So that was Steve's piece. And so we only have a brief moment of shameless self-promotion here. With the second piece is going to be something that I wrote, which was on the performance. And this is the second movement of the string quartet. It's the shortest one. It's 5 minutes long. The rest of the quartet was kind of long, but this one is a little shorter. So traditionally, in a string quartet, the second movement is usually the slowest and most melancholy of the four, and I stuck with the classic classical form, in that the first movement was fast, the second movement was moderately slow, the third movement was ridiculously weird and kind of strange, which the third movement is usually some kind of an odd scherzo, a comic piece, or sometimes it's something with special effects, and so I went with that. And then the last movement is usually fast, but not all of my last movement was, so I didn't completely follow that. But this definitely followed that trajectory, and the star of this show is Olga the violist, and I can't even pronounce her last name, so I tried to last week, and it was just a miserable failure, so I'm going to play the second movement of the string quartet Will-O-Wish as performed on Saturday at the concert. And it's just one of those movements that just kind of go away purposely. It's just like, that's it. Some of my composition students have a little bit of difficulty with that because they want to put a big ending on the end of everything, and modern contemporary music doesn't always do that. It just says what it needs to say, and then just kind of it's like, okay, I'm gone now.
Do any of the movements have a big ending?
No, no. And one is supposed to go into the other. So that really doesn't have an ending because it's just a segue with one instrument continuing as the other ones kind of fade away. No, actually, the ending of the piece is after the music completely fades away. The players make sound effects on their instruments that kind of resemble sort of a whoosh, and then they do a pizzicato behind the bridge so that it gives it a little plinky sound. So it kind of, the piece ends with this funny sound effect noise kind of stuff. So it's almost supposed to evoke the sound of like willows kind of in the wind, and sort of did, but yeah, so it's not real, da-da-dum is not really done a lot in contemporary composition. It's because we've come to find that almost to be maudlin or predictable, and pretty soon having it just go away will be maudlin and predictable, and then we'll have to find something else.
It has to keep evolving.
Exactly. So that's enough about shameless self-promotion for the week. Usually that segment isn't quite so long, and usually we do kind of move on to play some other music, but I am doing something different this week because we have two fabulous, interesting guests from out of the state, so I wanted to maximize the amount of time we were going to have to concentrate on what they bring to the table. And Laura is a musician. Andy is a music aficionado and connoisseur. So why don't you, Laura, so you start and tell us about what you're interested in, your background, your biography.
Well, Jewish music is a very large and diverse body of work, to say the least. I mean, chronologically and even in current times in terms of what's being written currently. My particular area of specialty is Yiddish song, which is music that is primarily Eastern European in kind of genre origin, in the original shape of it, but it reflects the immigrant experience, a lot of it, and the experience of people who are displaced and have to find and keep their culture in a foreign land and in surrounded by people who are not like them. So I sing mostly in Yiddish, and this is not new work. This is stuff that's actually quite old. But of course, the challenge then is to find what's new in the old. And I've had just a great time collaborating with Andy, who of course has a curator's ear for this music, and this Yiddish song's place in the larger canon of Jewish music. So we've had a good time.
That's really, really interesting that you have been able to sort of pool your knowledge base together to come up with some new discoveries. Can you kind of explain what your knowledge base and what you're into, Andy, and how you come to be such a connoisseur?
Well, I'm not even sure I'd describe myself as a connoisseur, but thank you, everybody, for describing me as such. I've been a huge fan of Jewish music for a little over 20 years, actually. In my early 30s, I heard a concert by the Klezmatics, one of the most well-known, actually, the modern klezmer groups. And they based some of their music on the older forms and scales. But they take it in new directions, often a rock and roll direction. But in any case, I was just so moved on a macro level, I guess, that they were finding a very modern expression for a heritage that I felt deeply and couldn't always express, but it came out in the sounds of the music. In some ways, those are the sounds I grew up with, and some of the Jewish sounds are the sounds that all listeners to American music have grown up with, because so many of the early great American songwriters were Jewish too. So anyway, I was moved by that and began writing a little bit about Jewish music and collecting, and I've been collecting over about 20 years, and there's an incredible amount and variety of Jewish vinyl, and even older Jewish shellac, I guess, 78s. But I've mostly been concentrating on vinyl from the mid 50s to I guess the mid 80s. And I can find music in all different forms and all different kinds of expressions of Judaism and Jewish culture.
Even different languages.
That's exactly right. In a sense, Jewish music is the ultimate world music because Jews have lived everywhere and have absorbed motifs from everywhere they've lived and rhythms from everywhere they've lived and added that to something that's a Jewish essence, which is something that I guess scholars argue about all the time, what actually makes Jewish music Jewish. But in a very basic sense, it's some kind of a Jewish expression, whether it's a cultural expression and even of closeness or even of negativity toward the culture, but it's an expression of Jewish culture or thought through music, through sound.
So you're bringing to the table, Laura, some traditional music, and you're studying it almost as in an historical sense, or almost like an archaeologist would study.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I first trained in classical music, like you, and so I guess in a sense I'm approaching this historical music as a classical musician would. You know, I work from source documents, from printed music, from earlier recordings, and from the evidence of people who have done it before me. But then again, as I said, you know, the challenge as a performer is to find something fresh within it,
right,
and find something that's relevant. You know, I mean, why would you sing a song from, you know, the mid 1800s, and how can you bring something new and fresh to it?
Right, and so you're kind of going from the angle almost like the roots, and then Andy, you're studying music that has been recorded, which of course now you're, Laura, having to partially inject your own interpretations because some of the things that you're working with, there are no recordings.
Well, there aren't recordings of the time when they were first written.
Right.
But certainly people have recorded them, and I've had the good fortune to be standing on the shoulders of some of the people who brought this music back into some sort of prominence, who rescued it from neglect. In some cases, you know, Yiddish as a language nearly died out in the Holocaust, and, you know, during World War II, half of the living Yiddish speakers in the world were murdered in the course of 6 years. And so the language and the cultural attributes of it, the music, the poetry, the literature, was very much threatened, jeopardized, and people after the war who cared about it started to record it and to bring it back to the extent they could, and to care for it and curate it so that it could be still part of our lives now.
So how do you feel, Andy, then about some of the traditionally performed music being kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, borrowed and put into the Klasmetics, which I actually have a Klasmetics album because they were that mainstream for a while.
Were, yes.
And you're right, they did include things that made it a little more accessible for my ear because I wasn't trained to understand.
Well, I mean, they took a lot of American rock music and put it into their music, so it was way more accessible.
So you seem to be really, from listening to your show, you seem to be really okay with all of that.
Oh, yes, with all kinds of expression of Jewish music. Well, in a sense, too, Jewish music, well, like all music, but maybe even more so, Jewish music is always changing, in the sense that there's something called the Pintel Yid, the little Yiddish essence, the little Jewish essence that exists in all these songs, but especially in America, and especially in the last 30 or 40 years, and even in the first 30 or 40 years of the 20th century, Jewish music changed rapidly. Almost every few years, you had another version. So I love all that, and I think one of the joys and actually the challenges of living as a modern Jew in our society is finding ways where our Judaism fits and how to apply it and how to express it. And new musical ideas is as wonderful a way as any to express that.
Right, and so you were bringing up the fact that a lot of musicals were written by Jewish songwriters, and you're saying that there's this essence that you it's a flavor or an essence or an aroma of Jewishness to the music. Do you hear it in just mainstream musicals, like Singing in the Rain or that kind of stuff, the Sound of Music? Do you hear those little flavors coming in?
I think it depends on the composer. Certainly, some of the Jewish composers, like George Gershwin,
Right.
always harken back to Jewish scales. And they're kind of minor key scales. They're bluesy kinds of scales, scales that cantors might have sung. But they often they do come about in some of his songs, and so you can hear it. And
Leonard Bernstein too.
Yeah,
very
that's
much
right.
so. He used some intervals and chordal progressions that were very much out of the Jewish tradition, even though when he placed them in things like West Side Story, it was a story that wasn't specifically in any way Jewish, but there were some things that gave it a kind of ethnic flavor.
And I think really it started with Irving Berlin, who was, I think he was an American-born composer, but certainly as a little boy at least lived in New York and was able to take the Jewish sounds that he grew up with and combine them with this brand new, exciting, growing New York of the early 20th century. But he always hearkened back to his older music, the music of his heritage, absolutely.
That's neat. I never thought of that. Yeah. So you both come with musical gifts to offer today, and I'd like to kind of get to that. One of you has brought recordings, beloved recordings, and the other has brought a concertina, which you will tell us the story of the concertina. But let's listen to music first, and let's listen to something recorded first, so we can kind of get the setup for the concertina going in the break.
Okay, I thought actually I'd start with something traditional, and there is a tradition of great cantorial music. The cantors are liturgical singers. They led prayer, and certainly, especially in the early 20th centuries, the cantors who recorded had operatic quality voices, and some actually performed in the opera. Some even performed on vaudeville. So this is a song by one of the greats, cantor Josela Rosenblatt, who was born in the Ukraine. And this recording is from 1910, and it comes from actually Psalm 113, for those of you who are keeping track.
Thank God. Boys, em Abulis Mecho, em Abulis Mecho, em Abulis Mecho, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, em Abulis Mecho, em Abulis Mecho, Hallelujah.
Sorry.
It's okay, riverwestradio.com. Here we are with Compose Yourself, except for this show is almost sort of like nested in a show today. We've got Sounds Jewish radio host here, Andy Mushin, and he just played an example that you normally would play on your show.
Yes, I don't play a lot of cantorial music, but there's always room for one piece in each 59-minute show. And
We got 2 hours, so you can play 2.
oh, believe me, I got them here. This is one of the earliest, actually, of the recorded cantorial pieces, and the guy had pipes. I mean, this was pre-electronic recording, and he sure came across, and he had a gorgeous voice.
It was very full, and just you could hear the technique and the proper use of air control and the space resonance and space. Just beautiful.
They forgot to auto-tune him, though.
I don't think he needed it.
Yeah. The fact that he recorded with piano was because this was entertainment. Had he been singing in a synagogue, there would have been no musical instrument. By the way.
Okay, I was
It's
wondering
interesting
about
to
that.
know, yeah.
Most of them were cantorial soloists. They didn't actually want to have a piano. They didn't want accompaniment.
So were they influenced by opera-style singing, or did they influence opera-style singing, or both?
Both.
I think. I mean, certainly. In the middle of that piece, you heard it sure sounded like a great opera tenor to me. And,
Yep.
But then there are certain techniques that I think are more unique to Jewish singing, especially that crying in the voice, krachting in Yiddish, the crying that you also hear in clarinets, and we'll hear that later.
Yes, and for my voice students who might be listening, that is produced with the glottal attack, kind of flipping of the head voice and chest voice, kind of like yodeling. I mean, all cultures have some kind of a version of this, and it does add, it adds a special spice or a whine or a longing kind of, pleading kind of a sound. I've heard that.
It's also a really good way to work on getting gaps out of your voice, just because it's really hard to do if you have any kind of gap in your range.
And it's hard to control. Some people do it and they don't do it well because they don't have control over it. So it's just happening. But when you use it with control and you place it in the right place, it's gorgeous. Yeah, it reminded me of like vintage Caruso. Mm-hmm. It really did.
Well, there was a whole tradition of classical cantorial training in the Ukraine, especially in the late 19th century, and most of these singers didn't sing in conservatory, but they did train sometimes with singers who had, and the great classical cantors who taught them certainly knew all those techniques. Absolutely.
Very neat. So, Laura,
Yeah.
you are poised and ready to play and sing. Would you introduce what you are going to perform?
Well, I thought in honor of Thanksgiving that we would do a song about, it kind of reminiscent of the difficulties one sometimes finds in emotional relationships and families. And it's actually a battle of the sexes song. The characters are a young man who is trying to figure out if he can get the advantage in a potential relationship by testing the woman in whom he's interested, by asking her several questions. And he asks her these questions, and she responds by telling him that he's an absolute fool for asking these questions, and the answer should be obvious, and what's he thinking? But again, in honor of Thanksgiving, the chorus interjects after each verse with just saying, don't ever mind about all that. We should just be happy. So I'm making Andy sing with me on the chorus because, and anybody else who wants to can just join right in. It's called Tumba la Laika.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right? Here we go. Steht der Bocher, steht und tracht, tracht und tracht. die ganze Nacht. Wemmen zu nehmen und nicht verschämen, Wemmen zu nehmen und nicht verschämen. Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, spiel balalaika, tumbala, laika, Freilach soll sein. Mädel, Mädel, ich will bei dir fragen, was kann wachsen, wachsen und regen, was kann denken und nicht aufhören, was kann trennen, trennen und hören. Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, spiel balalaika, tumbala-laika, Freilach soll sein. Narische Boche, was darfst du fragen? Ein Stein kann wachsen, wachsen und regen. Liebe kann brennen und nicht aufhören. Ein Herz kann denken, weinen und röhren. Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, spiel balalaika, tumbala-laika, Freilach soll sein.
All right.
That was neat. That was neat. I liked the fact that the way you sung it, you told us the story, so I got the general idea. The way you sung it, I could tell what part of the story you were on. I could tell, the part where the girl's like, come on, really? How could you be so stupid?
Yeah, but it's a story as old as human history, and I really had the great good fortune to learn this song first via recording, and then later actually with one of the great performers in the Yiddish song field, who Marta Schlama was her name, who after World War II was able to emigrate to the United States and had a great career in New York and recording as part of the folk music renaissance. She actually brought Yiddish song into that. She recorded with Pete Seeger and the Weavers and all of those guys, and she did her own recordings and had some huge hits. The folk music was a big new deal in the late 50s, and she was a huge part of that. So I had a really, really lucky chance to be in her orbit while she was still alive.
That is a really neat thing. That is a real neat thing. I think that folk music is coming back with very young people.
Yeah, it is. And as Andy said, it's coming back with a lot of influence from, we all have in our ears all the music that's happened since then, since the folk music renaissance. We hear rock, we hear rap, we hear jazz, we hear all of the things that are then become part of our vocabulary, and maybe we can start incorporating it, as the Klezmatics have done, into some of what we perform as well.
I wanted to add, too, that one of the things I like most about Jewish folk music, and I assume most folk musics, is that it's so true to life. Most of the Jewish folk songs are songs of romance, or songs of suffering in romance, or songs of misunderstanding between parents and kids, and whether they're in Yiddish or, as Jacob was saying, their other languages, Ladino, Spanish, Jewish, all the songs just hit you right in the kishkas, the guts, as they would say in Yiddish.
Yeah.
Oh, that is true with other kinds of folk music. I mean, when I listen to a Cat Stevens or a Pete Seeger album or something, they sing about all that stuff too. It was just whatever kind of feelings they could get into their 2 or 3 chords that they knew how to play.
Well, and a lot of those folk musicians, from that folk music renaissance, came themselves out of the Jewish cultural tradition. So they may have not only heard some of the Jewish folk music in growing up as kids from their parents and grandparents, but also may have been influenced by the part that musical curiosity plays for people in the Jewish cultural tradition.
Well, I think part of, too, why some of this was emerging in the 50s is a lot of, I don't know if it was one or influenced the other, or once again, both influenced both, but like, for example, the Beatles were tired of major and minor scale patterns and started looking at, Eastern Indian scale patterns, but you could hear other things infiltrating, the Beatles music in the 50s, late 50s, and just early 60s. It's I think that the whole folk thing kind of rubbed off on pop music, and now maybe, like you said, pop music can start to rub off on it. I mean, do you have any examples like that, Andy, where it's really just kind of obvious one has influenced the other and vice versa?
Folk music and well, let me think about that. Can I? And I have a short tune by Martha Schlamann. I just think it would be nice to play something by her, since Martha taught Laura, and
Right.
since the holiday of Hanukkah, the Jewish Festival of Lights, is coming up very soon, I have a Hanukkah song. This one is called Hanukkah, O Hanukkah, and it's a song about lighting the candles in the candelabra that we call the menorah, and dancing around it and feeling joy, and actually sort of grooving on the light in a very dark time of the year. So this is Martha Schlamann, and it's it's a digitized it's a digitized LP cut, so it's a little poppy, but it's good.
Hanukkah, Hanukkah, Yom Tov Hashener, a lustiger Afilach und die Donner Chazene, alle Nacht im Redel spielen wir, so die Kessel nachgesessen wir. Verschwinde sind Kinder, die nicht gelicht alle Horn, sagt Allah Nissim, bleibt Gott vor die Nissim und kommt ihr vertanzen in Korn. Sagt Allah Nissim, bleibt Gott vor die Nissim und kommt ihr vertanzen in Korn. Jehuda hat vertrieben dem Säune, dem Rotzea, und hat in Besamikdash gesungen am Nachseja. Die Stadt Jerusalem hat wieder gelebt, und zu einem neuen Leben hat jeder besteht. Der Rieber, dem Gieber, Jehuda Maccabi läuft heut. Soll jeder besonder besingen die Wunder und lieben des Volks an der Reihe. Heuer Hanukkah, Hanukkah, Yom Tov Hashener, a lustiger Friedrich und die Donner Chazene, alle Nacht im Redel spielen wir, so dick ist die Nacht essen wir. Geschwinder sind Kinder, die nicht gelichtele Horn, sagt Allah Nissim, bleibt Gott vor die Nissim und kommt ihr vertanzen in Korn. Sagt Allah Nissim, bleibt Gott vor die Nissim und kommt ihr vertanzen in Korn.
We are listening to Jewish music today on riverwestradio.com. Compose Yourself, Andy Mushin. Could you tell us what the name of that artist is again?
That was Martha Schlamann, really one of the great interpreters of Jewish music in the 1950s and the 1960s. She did Israeli music as well as sort of the more Yiddish music and some of the more religious music too. So she did it all, and
You
other
got
things.
to study with her.
Yeah, I did. That was it was for a very short time, but a very influential time for me, especially since I had grown up on her recordings. It was just a thrill to meet and work with her a little in person. And you mentioned how you could really hear the story in what she sang, and in the song that I did that I learned from her, originally from her recording, and that's partly because she was an singing actor. Really, she didn't think of herself as a singer. She thought of herself as an actor who gave her story through song. So that was always at the core of her performance style.
I think that's really important because, like you said, the music is supposed to be about things we can all relate to. So you really have to get sucked into that story.
Yeah.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
So you got this concertina.
Yeah.
you just kind of happened to just kind of fall into it. What happened there?
Well, it was actually one of those things, the story of Hanukkah that Andy was mentioning, that the Festival of Light that we're about to have in December. Last year during Hanukkah, I was doing a little concert at a senior citizens, senior living facility, and one of the residents there heard my little concert, and I had this concertina that was a kind of brand new, or not brand new, about 20-year-old factory built instrument, and kind of cranky, and its buttons would stick, and it was just a difficult instrument. But I was explaining to the audience that if something happened to it, I would fix it and be right back. And this one resident who was attending the concert came up to me at the end of the concert with a box, an old leather-covered box, and put it down and opened it up, and there was this beautiful antique concertina, and she gave it to me. She said that it had been in her family for 2.5 generations, and she just wanted a musician who would use it and appreciate it to have it. So,
What's the year of it?
It's a 1927 Wheatstone. Wheatstone is the manufacturer, the artisan workshop in London where it was made, and Sir Charles Wheatstone was really the inventor of the modern concertina instrument. That's so beloved for lots of different kinds of ethnic music. And this particular instrument that I have is a model called an Aola, which was the largest ever produced. There were only about 50 of them ever made. And it has a huge range and a beautiful voice, but it's got a very different configuration of its buttons than the one I had been playing. So, the punchline of all of this is I now have to, rewire my brain. I'm 8 months into rewiring my brain to play this thing. And it just sounds so good, though, that it rewards me every time I try. So,
Would you play another for us?
If you would like me to, I'd be happy to. Let's see. This one is another, it's not specifically seasonal, but it's one that I especially like. Let's see, because it kind of, for me, I don't know. It just speaks about the spirit of joy. That the Jewish music is a lot of the mixture of the bitter and the sweet. And this particular piece is called Abigazint, which means as long as you've got your health. And this was written by an American performer who was a star of the Yiddish theater. I don't know if you know that we had a really thriving Yiddish theater movement in New York, particularly, but in other cities around the country, from roughly the period of just before World War I to just before World War II, or actually just after World War II. It was just a golden age. There were new pieces up every week, and the stars were huge hits in recordings as well as in their live theater. And Molly Picon was the queen of the Yiddish theater, and she actually wrote this little piece. It talks about the compositional techniques that you were mentioning. One of the ones that she uses in it is a throwback to the old style of having a slow introduction and then a fast sort of body of the piece. So you can teach your students about that one too. So
Okay.
It's called Abigazint, and I will also sing it in Yiddish. So there you go.
Okay.
Eine sieht der Schieres, eine sieht Gewirres, einem in die ganze Welt. Einem meint das ganze Glück, hängt nur ob in Geld. Sollen alle siechen, sollen alle kriechen, nur es tracht bei mir. Ich darf es alles auf Kapures, das Glück steht bei mein Tier. A bissl Sinn, a bissl Regen, a ruhig Ort den Kopf zu legen, a wie gesinnt kann man glücklich sein. A schicker Sock, a Kleid und Lattes, ein Käschena, a Dreyfus Lattes, a wie gesinnt kann man glücklich sein. Die Luft ist frei, vor jedem gleich, Die Sinn, sie scheint für jeden einem Arm oder reich. A bissl Freude, a bissl Lachen, amol mit Freund a Schnäpsel machen, a bi gesinnt, können glücklich sein. Thank you.
So, what are the words? What are the words of the repetitive, the part that repeats? What does that mean?
Well, the Abige sind, kann man glücklich sein. As long as you've got your health, you've got all the luck you need in the world. Yeah, and
Yep.
the verses, are things like the introduction is really about, some people spend their lives chasing after treasure or power or, worldly things. But I've been lucky enough to find out that what I really just need are the simple things, and as long as I concentrate on just having the simple things and the joy and the pleasure and the friends, and just one pair of shoes is enough, and a little change in my pocket in case I want to buy some candy, and a place to sleep that's safe and warm when it's raining outside. I've got all the luck in the world. So it's a really
Yeah.
hopeful song. Yeah.
Yeah, it really sounds, yes, I completely agree with that. And, sometimes when you hear these things, they become sort of like memes to us. My father was like, well, I know you've had a bad day, but you have your health.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's exactly what, yeah.
He's old from the old, his grandfather came from Poland, and it's the old country kind of way of thinking.
it.
And, you're a teenager, and you go, but I
yeah,
really
yeah.
wanted that bike, or, really wanted that job when you get older. But, really when it boils down to it, why do these things keep appearing over and over again in these songs? Because they are eternal.
They're true. They're
eternal truths.
Yeah, and Jewish grandmothers often say, "Be gesund" to their grandkids. That very same thing. As long as you've got your health, it's okay. So.
And the song also shows how much Molly Pecan really knew her audience. They were often Jewish immigrants. They didn't necessarily have a lot of money. She was singing during the Depression era.
That's
and
right.
people really needed that kind of a message. And she gave it to them. They left the theater feeling a little bit happier, I think.
Yeah, I've seen a video of her doing this. I mean, video. It was on YouTube, but it was obviously a clip of an old film. But she had done it in what we would now think of as the style of a music video. She sang it in the place where she would have been living her life. She was actually in a kitchen, peeling potatoes and mixing up some bread dough and moving things from the stove over to the ironing board and just doing sort of homey things. And talking about this again as a story, as you said about Martha Schlama's recording. Molly Pecan also had that ability to do this as an actress, to really sell the story through the music.
Wow.
We, Laura and I just had the wonderful opportunity to hear Theodore Bickel in concert, one of the great polyglot Jewish singers, one of the great polyglot singers, period, who's been on Broadway. He sings folk songs in, 22 different languages, and the man's 88 years old. He can barely walk up onto the stage, but when he gets up to sing, the songs really live in him, and everything he sings is transformative that way. And yes, it's really delivering the song in a very deep way each time, like Molly Pecan did.
Right. Yeah, that really came through. Very good. So you wanted to play another example, Andy?
Yeah, I did. We were talking before about where the folk movement and the Jewish movement really might have overlapped, and that would have been in the early 1960s with the late Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. He grew up as a Hasidic, a very religious Jew, and had all that kind of rabbinic training. But frankly, in the early 60s, he discovered LSD and went a slightly different direction. But he had a gift for writing very traditional sounding Jewish melodies in a modern vernacular. And he died, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I could look it up, but he died recently. But in any case, Jews all over the world sing his songs, and they sing his songs as part of worship services. So what he brought folk music to prayer, to liturgical music. So this song is Actually, he explains it. It's called Pitchouli, Open the Gates of Justice. And he did it live at the Village Gate, which is one of the coolest clubs in Greenwich Village in 1962. So he was really happening.
Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovo Vom Odeko. Please open the gates for me. Please open the gates. Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovo Vom Odeko. Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovay v'moideko. Oy Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovay v'moideko. 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 Oy Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovay v'moideko. Oy Pischuli Share Tzedek, Ovay v'moideko. Ay la 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 la. la la la
Yeah, it's ecstatic music, and it's music that you might actually find very religious Jews singing around a holiday table. That kind of a style of the crescendoing music.
And that particular song, I just sung on a weekly basis around the world. So
That's right.
I feel like I've heard it before, and it's possible hanging around with Jacob and being around and hearing,
He's always opening the gates of justice. That's just Jacob. Yeah.
I like to think of myself as closing the gate.
But I don't know if it's just because it contains certain modal elements that I expect to hear. The other thing that I heard in this that I felt like it was familiar is the whole idea of participation, and people start clapping and people start singing along, and I feel like that's a really big element. And
Yeah, Jewish music is a very participatory tradition, and speaking as a performer, I can say that I always feel that I'm at my most successful when people start singing along. The fact that I sing in Yiddish and that my target audience is mostly over 80 now, so the ones who sing along are fairly elderly, but it doesn't detract from the joy in the slightest. And then when their grandkids also start at least clapping along and feel that it's okay to do so, then I know they've really caught it.
Yeah, that's always cool. I mean, one of the ways that you can make the music more accessible so more people can sing along is just make it be la 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 la, like Carl Bach was doing a Nugun, as they call it. And there's just hundreds and hundreds of different motifs that have made it as Nuguns into Jewish ceremonies. I grew up with them, and I don't know any words to a lot of the melodies that I know. All I know is la 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 la,
And there aren't words to a lot of those
there aren't
melodies.
even words.
I'm reading a book on the history of klezmer music now, and the author Henry Sapoznik pointed out that the kind of nonsense syllables you hear, whether it's la 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 or die da die da die or bye 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 bye, can help you identify where the Jews came from, either who are singing it or who wrote the song. Yeah, so
that's cool.
And that's why us American Jews just kind of mix them all together,
that's exactly right.
Well, this kind of comes back to the discussion earlier about people coming, people being very poor because they've been displaced. When all you have is maybe a three-stringed instrument and your hands to clap with and your voices, you have to make the most of that. So I'm hearing that as well. Did you want to play something else?
Oh, sure, all kinds of things. There's a great tradition of humor too in Jewish music, and I have a number of really funny songs that I'd love to share with you. One of the great funny and actually brilliant Jewish musicians was a guy named Mickey Katz, who's actually the father of Joel Grey, the actor, and the grandfather of Jennifer Grey, the actress. And he was a clarinetist, Mickey was, and wrote spoof songs. In a sense, he was sort of the Yiddish Weird Al Yankovic. and here, he always put a good band together, by the way, so the songs always sounded good, and they would have the character of the song he was spoofing and then throw in a little klezmer, which is in very basic terms, Jewish wedding music. So here is Mickey Katz and his kosher jammers, as he calls it. This is off of a 78 RPM record somebody gave me. It's the St. Louis Blues, sort of in Yiddish.
Oh, I hate to see that evening sun go down. Zu beugen, mij laat ze meer, het ligt niet te zijn. That evening sun go down. Als mijn St. Louis mädel, sie wagen zich herum downtown. Now listen, Dortner, sie ist kraftig und saftig. Oh, 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 wie schön ist sie, oh, schön ist sie, ja, klar, wir dort. Ah, sie kommt von a klein Städtel, St. Louis, Missouri. And sie ist wie Halava, oh, she's the moit for me. Yeah, yeah. St. Louis woman, du tragst mein Diamond Brooch. Ja, Diamond Brooch, hey, ich hab's aber hier. Hast mir Zimmer jetzt gemacht von mir Amor. Yeah, 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 gekauft die Kleider, gekauft ihre Fahrtsbouquet. Fox für Kite, have them too. Have Rachmanin's, baby, yeah, yeah. Quit rising up mine heights. Ich hör die Blues, ja, ja, ja. Und ich weiß nicht, was. Ich hör die Blues. Plus den Kopf, plus die Nose. Yeah, yeah, Kopf, Nose, aha. Cause my thoughts get through me over. Hey, that's all raised dog. Life is noch in my heart get the stock. Oh mama, ain't got no nachers. I give you a check, but you warf mir weg. Soll der Waffen, yeah, yeah, soll der Waffen kann doch es. Ich bin sad and forgotten. Aber ich in Tat ist Tate.
So even though I was smiling the whole time and I didn't know what was being said, I felt really inclined to smile. It seemed kind of funny, but...
There were a few English words in there, so you got the little...
Sure, but can you help me out with what was being said?
Well, you know, there, as Jacob said, there were a lot of the mixture of English and Yiddish was a hallmark of this period of music humor, to the point that it actually had a term for it, Yinglish. But among the things he was saying, you know, he's sort of following the basic outline of the St. Louis Blues, but putting it into kind of immigrant stereotypical terms. So he's saying, you know, this woman, she's really, really curvy, and at one point he says she's as sweet as halva. You know, halva is this very, very sweet Eastern European and kind of Mediterranean area pastry that's made of ground almonds and honey. So it's intensely sweet, and it's a classic thing to serve at the end of a Jewish ceremonial or festive meal. So she's as sweet as halva, but she's got, underneath all that, she's got some soul. You know, it's a great thing. You know, and she goes downtown and she just shows it off. But he's got all of these things, and the specific terms are also couched so that they are particularly accessible and meaningful to the people who've had that immigrant experience. So at one point he says, you know, she's not exactly from St. Louis. She comes from this little shtetl, this little village, you know, but it might have been in the neighborhood of St. Louis. You know, it's just a great combination of the sophisticated and the really, really greenhorn, and it's another hallmark of this kind of immigrant humor.
And the composition of it, being able to rhyme English and Yiddish words together and kind of switching the phrasing. Like he would use a little prepositional phrase in English and then right back into the Yiddish, and it's cool to make it flow like that.
Yeah, and he recorded a bunch of albums in the late 1950s and early 60s. All this kind of music. I have a bunch of these things, and I'm not going to play them all. Some with a little bit more English, but I thought you should hear him play the blues. The Jews can play the blues too.
You know, that was what I was just going to say. We've kind of touched upon how, you know, we've visited folk music and that influence, and now we're kind of getting into the blues, and of course then there's jazz. Mm-hmm. And I just, the obvious connection I see is the improvisational, you know, leanings of both styles. And of course then you have the clarinet. You brought up that singing style that is analogous on the clarinet, and I think a lot of jazz artists picked up on that.
And there's no question about it, and especially some of the ones who were themselves clarinetists. I mean, the composers who were also clarinetists, or had that as part of their early training, even if they weren't performing that way. I mean, Benny Goodman, a classic example, and Artie Shaw. You know, they were the big jazz stars who had come directly from that Eastern European Jewish sound tradition that included the krechts, those crying sounds that were done as part of the cantor style, the singer style, and then transferred to the instrumental style, especially in the clarinet.
Right, and then all of a sudden you hear Charlie Parker doing it in bebop. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, crying is universal, I guess. And so let me play an example of one of the great Jewish clarinetists. And by the way, in New York, you had all these musicians, many of them immigrants, and they all played each other's music. You know, there was no way really to make a living playing only one style of music. So the guys who played Jewish weddings also played in Greek bands and recorded sometimes almost the same songs, you know, as a Jewish song on one label and as a Greek song on the other label. So there was a lot of cross-fertilization among the ethnic musicians and then the ethnic musicians and the jazz musicians. So here's one of the great ones. This is a guy named Naftuli Brandwein, who was born in a Hasidic Jewish family, actually in the Ukraine, and was a big star in klezmer music, really from the 1920s on. Well, I think he died in the 1960s. Anyway, this is called Der Süßer Bulgar, the sweet, upbeat song.
Wow. Even though I was clearly once again hearing those modes and the flavor of what you would expect from the Jewish sound, I felt like I heard a little Cab Calloway in there too.
Well, they were in the same milieu, so to speak. And this is from 1923, by the way. I mean, this is really early. And he was doing all kinds of interesting syncopations, and, it was cool how they switched rhythms, tempos midway, and probably just like they would at a wedding.
Oh, well, and I mean, technically, he was doing some cool stuff too, just making the clarinet make noises that you wouldn't hear in classical music. There's just kind of, having the what do you call it, the I don't remember what they call it on a clarinet, but the sort of changing the timbre of it.
Mm-hmm. Right, he could kind of bend notes, and he could do the crying, and he played with a lot of soul. I mean, not all the music you heard in the 1920s had soul, and this certainly did. And it was probably better than anything Benny Goodman was playing in 1923, although by the 30s, that might have changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've heard folk, blues, jazz, but then there's coming full circle to the idea of the string quartet. There's the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time. And, that's one of my favorite pieces of all time. And it's not, again, stamped with the Jewish stamp. He doesn't use the modes and all of that, but with it, and he uses a lot of bird songs. You're familiar with the background. This is the piece that Messiaen wrote while he was in a concentration camp for string quartet. And there's a lot of bird sounds in it because that's what he could hear when he was sequestered. And I understand that. So he actually was writing, modern atonal classical music in that setting. And I'm wondering how being in that setting both influenced the music that was being produced and how much music was allowed to be produced in that setting, and just I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, it varied greatly by place and by how long individual specific residents were in those camps. Some of the concentration camps of World War II very famously, or perhaps infamously, produced incredible amounts of music because it was really all they had. In Theresienstadt, also called Terezin, the huge concentration camp outside of Prague, there were entire opera productions being done, and I mean, with nothing out of little bits of rag and scrap, and they had makeshift instruments, and they had makeshift rehearsal space, and and nothing for costumes. They would make it of little bits of things, but they wouldn't let go of it. It was their hope, really, and it wasn't just music. There were visual arts being made too, but the music was documented, as scary as that is, by a Red Cross film done at the time, because the Nazis actually allowed a Red Cross team in because they were showing this off as a model camp, as a supposedly humane concentration facility. Yes, exactly. And Potemkin Village is the sort of sociological name for it. So they actually had visitors attending these performances, and there was a children's opera by a Czech composer, Hans Krasa, called Brundibar was the name of the opera, that was given 50 performances, after which the composer and all of the performers, the adults and the children who performed in it, except for one, were shipped off to Auschwitz and killed. So, it after that, of course, there weren't any more opera productions. So it just depended on who was there at any given time. But yeah, Messiaen was not alone.
I just, wow, the concept of the music being both the soothing, the salve that soothes the wound, and the cover for what was going on at the same time. That's just
but with Brundibar, it had a third mode as well, which was the story of this little children's opera was like a fairy tale, an allegorical story about children banding together to save their village from a mean, ruthless character, from a mean, ruthless sort of dictator character called Brundibar, and the Nazis never seemed to catch on that what was really being described was them.
Yeah.
And they allowed these 50 performances even for visitors. But the looking at it with our eyes now, the storyline was very, very clear. And they were getting away with everything they could, and expressing what they could to themselves, to each other, and to anybody who could be reached through that medium.
Right, and it was certainly for the artists themselves, a piece of their essence that they could express, and the last vestige of civilization that they had in their lives. I actually have a clip from, I think it's the Red Cross movie that Laura was just referring to, not of Brunderbar, but there was actually a jazz band in Terezin called the Ghetto Swingers. And this is a snippet from the song Bemir Bis Duchesne, which was a popular Yiddish song, and then that the Andrews Sisters turned into a big hit in 1938. So this is off of a best of album by Coco Schumann, who was a German jazz guitarist who actually played drums in this band. Anyway, this is actually coming from Terezin in probably 1942 or 1943.
gerne ein paar Stunden seiner Freizeit.
Wow, that's really kind of haunting because it's supposed to sound like party music, but the minor mode of it and just the, realization of what it was.
Yeah, the song itself has that, whether it was this recording of it or not. Of course, it's specifically haunting because it was this particular recording, but that minor mode, even with the party swing, is a hallmark of Jewish music. The bitter and the sweet are always taken together, and that you're as in the Jewish tradition, you're reminded to think of the sweet every time things are really awful, and to remember that there is hope and that there is sweetness in life, and then also to temper the sweetness with a reminder of how bad things have also been, and that there is this balance, so that that even when there's a wedding or something intensely joyous, that you have to remember that it's not always this good for everybody. So that's that characteristic of balance and both elements working in kind of held in tension is a real characteristic of this music.
And that particular performance of it, I agree, is especially haunting. But from a technical aspect of it, the reason why all those modes sound so like half like total sorrow and half like joyous is they're all based on melodic minor scales, which depending on which direction you're going, it is not the same notes, and they can make it sound really happy for a second and then descend and it's totally sad, just anguish.
Right. Still, that is the saddest version of that song I think anybody will ever hear.
Right, the Andrews Sisters version is just happy, happy, happy. Let's all have a good time. It's the 40s, but
That's
not
right.
so much over this one, yeah.
So Sorry for the downer, but it's important to hear this and to think that this is part of Jewish musical history and world cultural history.
Well, that's why I asked you about it because, I only knew of the Messian example, but I knew there had to be more to it than that.
Well, and by Nibris Shane has a very special place in that particular musical history because it also, in addition to all the stuff that just mentioned, it was one of the first tunes that was from the very, very specifically Jewish repertoire to go mainstream and be a huge top 40 hit. I mean, the Andrews Sisters recording of it came 7 years after it was premiered as part of a Yiddish theater musical, a musical review, and in the Yiddish theater in New York that I was mentioning before. That was in 1932, and so by the time they recorded it those years later, a lot of the Jews knew it, but no one knew it who wasn't Jewish, but it became one of the hallmark songs of the World War II period and one of the ones that was played for GIs regardless of what culture they came from. And it was one of the ones that they felt by the end of the war was a very specifically American song. It had these new Yinglish lyrics, with a bit in Yiddish and then explaining what it was. And in the English version, it says, no matter what language I'm singing, it still means you're the greatest. So that's a very important song.
Wow. So do you have another song to play for us?
Well, I could. Yeah, sure. I could do one from that Yinglish tradition if you want me to. It's relatively new to my repertoire, so we'll see if I remember all the lyrics. Let's see. This one is from a compilation, or I learned it from a compilation of music that was brought to modern media under the compilation named Music for the Jewish American Jet Set, which is a hilarious title. But it was music from the 1950s, and it was a lot of this kind of crossover stuff. This particular one is in English, so some of it's definitely in English, but the punchlines are all in Yiddish, and it's a let's call the whole thing off song. It's a you say it one way and I say it another way, and the joke here is that that Yiddish has two main streams of pronunciation. The one that's called Litvak, people who came from mainly Lithuania, and Galicianer or Galitz, which is people who mainly came from the Polish areas and or the areas that are now Poland. And this particular song plays up on the fact that not only do they pronounce the very same language very differently, but that it almost is like a running cultural feud, like the Hatfields and the McCoys kind of thing. So we'll see how I do with this. From my husband I get such aggravation. He's driving me out of my wits. He's from a different denomination. I'm a Litvak and he's a Galitz. We're happily married, I don't want to squawk. We understand each other completely, except when we talk. I say Mutter, he says Mitter. Says mir bitter, I say putter, he says pitter. Nu, what's the difference, Mutter, mitter, bitter? Oh, how I schwitz, 'cause I'm a Litvak, and he's a Galitz, driving me crazy. Such a marriage, such fun glicken. He doesn't even know a chicken is a chicken. He keeps kicking how I'm spickin', says I put on the Ritz, 'cause I'm a Litvak, and he's a Galitz. I love my darling, there is no one finer. In Pinsk or Minsk or even Carolina. But when I call him Shana, he says Shina. Azamata meter Shveta var in China. Zolvus Tagus. He says Teugus. Every time that I get Bregus, he gets Broigus. Zovus Tegus, Teugus, Bregus, Broigus. I'll call it quits, 'cause I'm a Litvak, and he's a Galitz.
That was really, really fun. Well, I just can't thank the two of you enough for being on the show tonight.
Well, thank you for having us on. It's a great pleasure to hang with you and your audience.
Yeah.
We figured we may as well invite you while you're in town because it's a long flight to get here just for.
You may not have the budget to bring us in all that often.
Oh,
I don't have the
we're working
budget
up
to
to
come
it.
in. Yeah, that's right.
What? You guys are worth that much money now?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I just want to add on that last song, it was by a husband and wife band. The husband was a clarinetist who led a wedding band. The wife was the singer. And I assume this is a song they did at Jewish weddings in New York in the 1950s and maybe even the 1960s. And I'm sure it got a huge laugh because everybody there understood what they were saying and could relate to the fact that there are these, intra-Jewish differences.
Yeah. When I first sang this for my parents, my father laughed the loudest I'd heard him laugh in about 5 years. It was, the Jews of a certain age definitely get that joke. So, but you say potato, I say potato.
Right.
That's a kind of generational thing too.
That is so awesome. Well, Andy and Laura and Jacob, we are wrapping up another episode, another week of Compose Yourself. And I want to thank you for bringing music in. We're going to go out with one more selection that Andy will set up for us.
Right. This is brand new Jewish music based on traditional Jewish music. The Spanish Jews, the Sephardic Jews, had their own folk music with different kinds of modes, and you'll hear that when you hear this song. This is a band that kind of crosses the old Sephardic traditional music with indie rock. The band is called De Leon. The brand new album is called Tremor Fantasma, and this song is called Buena Semana, Good Week.
Buena semana, Musdelio. Buena semana, Musdelio. Buena semana, Musdelio. Salud y vida. Buena semana, Musdelio. Salud y vida. Que mis
candelas para mí. Hanukkah linda está aquí. 8 candelas para mí. Una candelica, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí. Muchas fiestas vou fazer com alegrias e prazer. Muchas fiestas vou fazer com alegrias e prazer. Una candelica, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí. Los pastelicos vou comer con almendricas y la miel. Los pastelicos vou comer con almendricas y la miel. Una candelica, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí.